Hello everyone, my name is Ivo and welcome to Cooking with the Koyas. And if you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe and of course click on the bell icon because today we are going to make authentic homemade Italian gnocchis from scratch. It's easier than you think, and this recipe comes from Abruzzi. It's our family recipe. My mother was born in Pacentro, Italy. My father was born in Tocco di Casauria, both in Abruzzi. And if you're familiar with either of those little villages in Italy, drop me a line and let me know. But anyhow, this recipe, we got to start off with potatoes. The authentic gnocchis uses potatoes. And my mother always said, the red potatoes are the absolute best for making gnocchis. A second best would be the Yukon Golds. Of course, any potato will do, but these are by far the best. And the red is definitely number one. Now, we need to boil these potatoes first thing we do. And the other thing I'd like to mention, how many potatoes do you use? As a general rule, I'm cooking for 3 today, my mother actually and my wife. And it's basically 1 large potato as a general rule per person. So these potatoes are not large, so I went with 2 per person. General rule. Okay, now in order to boil these potatoes, first of all, you want to leave the skin on. Very important, because boiling with the skin on retains all the nutrients and actually adds to flavor and texture of the potato. So leave the skin on. And what I'm doing is I'm just going around the potato and scoring it very, very lightly with a knife. And the reason for that is it's going to make it so much easier to remove the skins once these potatoes are boiled. So just quickly once around on all the potatoes, and you're just scoring, you're just going down, ever so slightly. Okay, and now they need to boil. We're going to put these on the stove, and they're going to have to boil. Once it comes to a boil, you want to boil your potatoes for 20-25 minutes, 30 minutes if you've got real big potatoes. So these ones are a little smaller. I'm going to bring it to a boil and let them boil for at least 20 minutes. And if you're ever wondering if they're cooked or not, you can just stick a fork inside and the fork should be able to easily go through the potato. Okay, so I've let the potatoes, I let them actually go the full half hour. So we let them go boil for 30 minutes. Perfect. Okay. Now what I like to do is, even though they're really hot, I do like to remove the skins while the potatoes are still hot, because we want to process them while they're hot. And with that same knife, just remove the skins. So I'm going to do this on all 6 of those potatoes. And the next thing we're going to do is weigh them, and I'll explain why. So I'm going to use grams because that's the easiest to work with. You can see this potato actually broke in half. I probably could have stopped at 25 minutes, but 30 minutes did it. So it's 690 grams is what I've got. So 690, I'm just going to make a note of that. Okay, perfect. Now the next step, what we have to do is we have to mash these potatoes. Now, the ideal tool is called a ricer. If you've never seen them, they are absolutely easy to use and they are fantastic. In fact, I even use these for just making regular mashed potatoes. If you don't have a ricer, I recommend getting one. They're not expensive and you could use them for other things as well. But for years we used to use just the vegetable mill, you know, the ones, the handles, and just crank them through. The results are the same. As you'll see, you get a stringy potato coming through. And it's really that easy. You just put the potato in, squeeze the handle, and you've got some really nice mashed potato. So obviously, if you don't have a ricer and you don't have a vegetable mill, then just mash the potatoes how you normally would. But this is actually really the best way to do it. And if the potatoes are too big to process at one time, then you can cut them in half and just put a half in at a time and give a squeeze. Okay, we've got 1 more to go. And a little bit that has accumulated here, I don't want to waste any potato at all. Get all that out. There we go. Okay, and what I should add is I like to do this step usually in the morning. That way I can just leave it and forget about it, because you want your mashed potato here to be completely cooled before you add the flour. Like I say, I like to do it in the morning or by noon, and then let it sit, because you don't want to process your gnocchis or make your gnocchis until it's ready for dinner time. So, and if you try to add flour right now to your hot mashed potato, all you're going to make is glue. It will not work. So make sure these are cooled down and cold. So I'm going to let them sit. I've got the whole afternoon ahead of me. I will come back later and we will finish making our gnocchis. Okay, so I have enjoyed my day. The potatoes have sat here and they are now very cold and ready to be made into a dough. So if I were to ask my mother, Ma, how do you make your gnocchi? She would say, you know, I get some potato and I add some flour and I mix it together, and I just can't do that. So that's why I measure. So we weighed our potatoes. We got 690 grams of potatoes. What I've calculated is 37% of that weight in flour. So I took 690 times 37% and I came up with 255 grams of flour, which I have pre-weighed right here. And I've also calculated 2 teaspoons of salt for every 500 grams of potatoes. So I have about just over 2.5 teaspoons of salt here based on the potatoes that I have and the flour. So what I like to do is sprinkle the potatoes with some flour and then put some, with some salt, and then put some salt in my flour as well. So now we're going to add the flour to the potato. Okay, and we're going to begin to make our dough. And of course, I always start with clean hands. So we'll give them another quick rinse. Okay, now to make the dough, you're going to be very surprised at how this comes together. So what I like to do is take my potato and flour, just kind of incorporate them, mix them together. And if you're checking this out, you're going to look at this and you're going to say, wow, that's really dry. How is that going to make a dough? But it does. The amount of moisture in the potatoes will eventually get absorbed into the flour. And we're going to do one thing to help it along. We're going to add 1 egg. So I have 1 egg here that we're going to add to our potato and flour mixture, which we've salted. That's it. Those are all the ingredients you need to make gnocchis. So I just, with that egg, and now what you do is just start kneading this dough. And if you notice, it's just still very crumbly, and you're thinking to yourself, uh-oh, I made a mistake. I used too much flour. It's not coming together. But don't worry, it will. It will come together, and it will make a nice dough. So just keep working it, and as you're doing that, you're getting that nice moisture from the potato incorporated with the flour, and just mix it all together. You can see it's already starting to form into a dough. It's starting to come together. Now, after we get this all together, I'm going to knead it for a few minutes. And then what we're going to do is we're going to let it rest, because it needs to relax for about 5 minutes before we begin making our actual gnocchis. Okay, so I've kneaded it for about 2 to 3 minutes. And as you can probably see here, it's actually now sticky. It's gone from one extreme to the other. It's gone from being totally dry to being just a little bit sticky. And you can see my hands stuck a bit. No problem. We're going to get cleaned up, but for now, just going to put a little bit of flour on this. Okay, and we're just going to let it rest. Put a towel over it. We're going to let it rest for 5 minutes, and then we're going to start making our gnocchis. And that 5 minutes will give me a little opportunity to clean up this counter here and get ready. Now, if it was my mother, of course, she would be making this on a wooden board. That's the old traditional way. Okay, so it's been resting nicely. It's given me just enough time to rewash up again And now we're gonna start having some fun. And it is actually a lot of fun to make gnocchis. It really is. All right, so you're gonna need flour. You're always gonna need to have flour with you. And again, I just use, for these gnocchis, if I didn't mention it earlier, I just use regular flour. I like to use unbleached personally, but just regular flour. And now I like to just slice a small piece, and I'll just continue to slice and work my way. But I'll start with this real small one for now. And what I like to do is just shape it and then roll it. And you want it to be like, I'm going to say snake-like. So about the size of a snake. You don't want it too thin and you don't want it too thick. So I don't know, it's about 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, something like that. Now we're going to just cut those up. So I'm going to put a little bit of flour. Like I say, you need flour for sure while you're doing this. And I like to double up on the potato like that. And then I like to cut at an angle and cut to the size that you want. About an inch, inch and a half. Then once you're done, you could use a fork, but again, the traditional Italian way is with the finger. So you just put your finger and just push down on the gnocchi and pull towards you. And what you're doing is you're just creating a nice divot inside that gnocchi. And what that divot's going to do is that's just going to hold the sauce nicely and just make for a real nice plate of gnocchi. So I add a little more flour, toss it up, shake off a bit of the excess, and then separate them and put them in a pan. Now remember, I'm going to be having dinner in about a half an hour, so I like to do this, as I mentioned, you know, just before you're ready for dinner, because as they sit and rest, you don't want them to sit and rest for a long time because they might start to stick together. So I try to time it if I can, so that we take them right out of here and put them right into the pot, which I've got a pot of water on the stove already going. So there's my next one. This one came a little longer, and same thing. I'm going to put it together here. Oh, just about an inch. Oop, that one came a bit big. And I like to cut on an angle. And again, just roll them right with your finger. Now, you don't have to do this rolling part if you don't want to. You can leave them just the way they are. But again, this is the traditional way, and it's designed so that it will hold the sauce. Okay. So, again, shake off the excess. Into the pan it goes. All right, so I'm going to continue working my way. As you can see, I'm already, it doesn't take long. And it is a lot of fun. So I'm going to continue rolling these, and give me a few minutes, we'll be right back. This did not take me long at all. Mind you, my mother would have been done probably a few minutes ago, but I still get the job done. So this is the last one, and as you can see here, I've almost got that tray filled. I will by the time I finish this one. Okay, that's good. Maybe just a little bit thinner there. Okay. Of course, the thinner you go, the longer they become. And a little bit of flour. All right. So again, I like to cut at an angle. And the thing is with these gnocchis, because we weighed the ingredients, I know they're going to be very soft and creamy. They're going to have the absolute perfect texture that you need when it comes to gnocchi. Not too hard, not too firm, not too soft. They're going to have the perfect consistency, and that is the beauty of weighing your ingredients. Now, I also want to mention another thing to you, as you can see here. If you want to make these in advance, or if you make a double batch, because I only made enough here. Well, actually, okay, 690 grams of flour, of potato plus 255 grams of flour gave me over 900 grams of finished gnocchis. And again, general rule, 200 grams of finished gnocchis per person is plenty. So this doesn't look like enough, but that'll easily feed 4 people. So if you wanted to make a double batch, what you could do is put this right in your freezer, just the way it is. Take it, put it right in the freezer, and then the next morning, take it out, drop it on the counter. They'll all come off the off the pan, and they'll be all individually frozen. You can put them in a freezer bag and to keep them until the next time you're ready to cook them. And when you cook them from frozen, just like we're gonna cook right now. I've got these done so quick, the water isn't even boiled yet. So the water, we're gonna bring it to a boil, and let's cook up these gnocchis. Our water has now come to a nice, vigorous boil, and I salted my water. And you know what they say, how much salt you put in, you want it to taste like the ocean. Well, what does that mean? It means 10 grams of salt for every liter of water. So generally speaking, almost a tablespoon of salt per liter of water. So I already salted my water, and now what I'm gonna do is just slowly start to add the gnocchis into the boiling water. So I just get that slowly in there because we don't want it to splash too much, although I am splashing a bit, I can see. Usually my wife does this part, so. Okay. And she is going to join me for dinner tonight, as is my mother. Okay, I need my favorite kitchen utensil. I need my wooden spoon. So now that they're in there, with a wooden spoon, give them a stir. You don't want anything sticking to the bottom. Okay. Now it's got to come back to a boil again. So in order to assist, we're going to put the lid on there and bring it back to a boil. And then what will happen is, as the gnocchis start to cook, they'll begin to float. So once they've all floated, that's how you know that they're cooked. In fact, if you really wanted to, you could even take one out and just taste it. But generally speaking, once they're floating, they're cooked. Okay, so it's actually been just over a minute now, and some of them are starting to float. And that's another thing to keep in mind. Once you put the gnocchis in the pot and they begin to cook, you don't want to leave the stove. You want to stay here. You don't want it to overflow as it boils. So you always want to keep an eye on your pot. And right now I can see a lot of them are floating up to the top, but I want it to come back to a boil. It hasn't really come back to a boil yet, and they're not all floating. So I'm going to let it continue to cook until it comes up to an actual boil. Okay, now as you can see, it's finally come to a boil. The gnocchis are on the top, and as you can see, that's why you need to stay close to the stove. You don't want it to overflow on you. So now that they're all floating, and I should have mentioned, and it's come to a boil, now they're just about done. I'm going to give them another 30 seconds, and then they can come out. As opposed to taking them out and dumping it like you would normal pasta, I like to take a strainer and just take them out by hand because they're nice and delicate, and I don't want them to stick. So we'll just do that. Take them out, and I put them in another strainer so that they'll drain some more, because when we add our sauce, we don't want to have any water. And it looks like, yeah, they all floated. There's nothing on the bottom. Oh, there was one on the bottom. We don't want to let that guy go to waste. Okay, there we go. All the gnocchis are out, and you can see I've drained a bit more water out of there, which is really nice. Shake off any excess. Look at this. Into our serving plate they go. Now I'm going to take some of my homemade tomato sauce, and if you haven't seen it yet, I will put a link in the description for you. You can check out how I made this sauce. But it is the classic Italian tomato sauce. I like to add that to my gnocchis and then mix them around a bit. Get them all coated with the sauce. And I also like to put some extra sauce on the table for those who like to add a little more sauce to their gnocchis. Okay, look at this dish. Oh my goodness. Homemade gnocchis. Can you imagine how easy that was to do? You will never buy that packaged gnocchi ever again. Very, very little effort. Very, very good reward. I've got some Parmigiano Reggiano. Just sprinkle a little on top. We are good to go. That's how easy it is to make authentic Italian gnocchis. This comes from the region of Abruzzi. I'm so glad you can join me today. I'm going to sit down and have a nice meal with my wife and my mother. We're going to enjoy these gnocchis, maybe with a glass of wine. Wherever you're tuning in from today, if you get an opportunity, by all means, give this recipe a try. And if you do, drop me a line. Let me know how it turned out. Love to hear from you. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, good luck and bon appetit.